In the early hours before scheduled peace discussions, the skyline of Kyiv was once again illuminated, not by sunrise but by missile intercepts and air defense explosions. Just hours before diplomats were expected to sit across the table, Russia launched a fresh strike targeting the Ukrainian capital. Why strike now? And what message does such timing send, not only to Kyiv but to negotiators, European leaders and global markets watching closely? This latest missile attack has raised difficult questions about the trajectory of the conflict in 26. Is this a final show of force before diplomacy resumes, or a sign that negotiations may be more fragile than many hoped? Tonight we break down what happened, what it means, and what could come next. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian forces launched a coordinated missile and drone strike targeting Kyiv and surrounding infrastructure just hours before scheduled peace discussions were set to begin between Russian and Ukrainian representatives. The attack reportedly involved cruise missiles and long-range strike drones launched from Russian-controlled territory and possibly from strategic aviation platforms. Kyiv's air defense systems were activated overnight, and authorities reported multiple interceptions. However, some strikes reached their targets, causing damage to energy infrastructure and residential buildings. Casualty figures remain under official verification at the time of reporting. The strike comes amid renewed diplomatic efforts aimed at de-escalation. Over recent months, back-channel communications and indirect mediation, reportedly involving European intermediaries, had led to tentative confidence-building measures. These included limited prisoner exchanges and discussions on humanitarian corridors. However, fighting has continued across multiple fronts. Russian forces remain entrenched in eastern and southern Ukraine, while Ukrainian forces have conducted counter-offensive operations targeting logistics hubs and military infrastructure. The broader conflict, which began in 2022 with Russia's full-scale invasion, has evolved into a prolonged war of attrition. Both sides have faced heavy casualties, infrastructure damage, and economic strain. By 2026, the war has settled into periodic escalations punctuated by diplomatic efforts often fragile and short-lived. The timing of this latest strike immediately before peace talks has become the central issue of analysis. Ukrainian defense officials stated that multiple waves of missiles were detected overnight. Air raid sirens were activated across Kyiv shortly after midnight. According to preliminary reports, the attack involved a mix of cruise missiles and unmanned aerial systems. Ukraine's air defense network strengthened significantly since 2022, with Western-supplied systems intercepted a substantial portion of the incoming threats. However, officials acknowledged that some projectiles penetrated defenses, striking energy facilities and urban infrastructure. Emergency services responded to several impact sites across the capital region. Power outages were reported in select districts, though restoration efforts began within hours. Damage assessments are ongoing. From the Russian side, official statements frame the operation as a strike against military-industrial targets and infrastructure linked to Ukrainian defense capabilities. Russian officials did not directly reference the upcoming peace talks in their initial comments. This distinction is critical. Moscow's narrative maintains that such strikes are part of ongoing military operations rather than a diplomatic signal. However, the timing inevitably invites scrutiny. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attack, describing it as evidence that Russia is negotiating under pressure, not in good faith. He called on international partners to strengthen air defense support and maintain sanctions. Russia's leadership under President Vladimir Putin has consistently stated that military operations will continue until what it describes as its security objectives are met. Russian officials have previously argued that negotiations must recognize territorial realities on the ground. Western leaders responded cautiously. European Union representatives reiterated support for Ukraine's sovereignty while urging both sides to remain committed to diplomatic channels. The United States expressed concern over the timing of the strike but did not announce immediate policy changes. Military analysts suggest several possible strategic motivations behind the strike. First, signaling leverage. Launching a strike before negotiations may be intended to demonstrate continued military capability and bargaining strength. In conflicts of attrition, battlefield pressure often shapes diplomatic positions. Second, deterrence messaging. Moscow may be signaling that it retains escalation dominance, particularly in long-range strike capabilities. Third, internal political considerations. Demonstrating continued operational capacity can reinforce domestic narratives about resolve and control. From Ukraine's perspective, the strike underscores the ongoing vulnerability of urban centers, even with improved air defense systems. It also strengthens Kyiv's argument for additional advanced defense platforms from Western partners. While large-scale destruction was reportedly limited compared to earlier phases of the war, even partial damage to energy infrastructure has implications. Ukraine's power grid has been a recurring target since 2022. Each strike tests resilience and repair capacity. Civilian safety remains a central concern. Though shelters and early warning systems have reduced casualties over time, the psychological toll of repeated air raid alerts cannot be underestimated. Humanitarian agencies continue monitoring displacement patterns, while Kyiv has remained functional throughout the conflict. Intermittent attacks disrupt daily life, business operations, and economic stability. Perhaps the most significant aspect of this event is its impact on the diplomatic environment. Peace talks scheduled for this week were already described as exploratory rather than decisive. The agenda reportedly includes ceasefire frameworks, prisoner exchanges, and security guarantees. The strike complicates trust-building measures. Ukrainian officials have indicated they will still attend discussions, but under what they describe as heightened caution. International mediators now face the challenge of preventing the talks from collapsing before they begin. The conflict has fundamentally reshaped Europe's security architecture. Since 2022, NATO has reinforced its eastern flank, increased defense spending, and accelerated military modernization programs. Any escalation near peace talks raises concerns about miscalculation. European governments remain wary of spillover risks, particularly involving airspace incidents or cyber operations. Although Ukraine is not a NATO member, the alliance has provided significant military assistance. Escalatory actions near negotiation periods place pressure on NATO governments to balance deterrence with diplomatic restraint. A breakdown in talks could increase calls within some member states for expanded support packages. Global markets have reacted to each major escalation since the conflict began. Energy prices remain sensitive to disruptions involving Russia, a major energy exporter. Although Europe has diversified energy sources since 2022, renewed instability can influence natural gas markets, insurance costs, and commodity flows. Investor confidence often hinges on expectations of conflict duration. A strike before peace talks introduces uncertainty, particularly if negotiations stall. Beyond Europe, the conflict serves as a case study in modern warfare. Drone integration, air defense networks, sanctions resilience, and alliance coordination. Countries observing the war analyze both battlefield tactics and diplomatic maneuvers. The timing of military actions relative to negotiations sends signals globally about negotiation strategies in high-intensity conflicts. Negotiations proceed, possibly resulting in incremental agreements. These could include localized ceasefires, expanded humanitarian corridors, or infrastructure protection arrangements. Under this pathway, diplomatic channels remain open. Military operations continue at reduced intensity. Confidence-building steps gradually expand. International mediators increase involvement. This scenario assumes that both Moscow and Kyiv see long-term benefit in stabilization, whether due to economic strain, battlefield fatigue, or international pressure. History shows that even amid ongoing hostilities, limited agreements are possible. However, sustained de-escalation would require concessions from both sides. Alternatively, the strike could signal a more confrontational phase. If talks collapse, military operations may intensify. Russia could increase long-range strikes, while Ukraine could expand counterstrikes against logistical targets. Consequences under this scenario might include increased Western military assistance to Ukraine, expanded sanctions on Russian industries, greater volatility in energy and commodity markets, heightened cyber activity across Europe. Escalation risks miscalculation, particularly involving air defense systems near NATO borders, or maritime operations in the Black Sea region. This pathway would likely prolong the conflict further into 2026 and beyond. The missile strike on Kyiv occurring just hours before peace discussions highlights the fragile intersection between warfare and diplomacy. Conflicts rarely move in straight lines. They advance through pressure, negotiation, setbacks, and recalibration. The question now is whether this latest escalation represents a final show of force before compromise, or a sign that deeper divisions remain unresolved. As observers, analysts, and global citizens, we must consider not only the immediate damage, but the broader strategic trajectory. Do you believe this strike was intended as leverage before negotiations, or does it signal a breakdown in trust that will be difficult to repair? Share your thoughts in the comments. Constructive discussion helps us better understand the complexities of global events. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay analytical, and we will continue to monitor developments closely.